My sister tightened my neck brace as a joke until I couldn't breathe. And a week later, the police arrived at my door. How does a family argument turn into federal investigators, identity theft, and the kind of betrayal that rewrites your entire life? That's what I'm going to tell you. My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Pennsylvania. I'm not the kind of person who thrives on drama. I don't drink much. I don't party. I don't even like surprises. I live alone in a small apartment that's clean, quiet, and carefully organized. Some people call that lonely. I call it safe. And for most of my life, safety was something I had to build with my own hands because nobody in my family ever built it for me, especially not my sister. Charlotte is 4 years younger than me. She's 31, unemployed, and has lived off our parents' money for as long as I can remember. She's also the kind of person who walks through life like the rules were written for everyone else. She laughs loudly, cries when she needs something, and somehow always ends up being protected no matter what she does. Protected by our mother, mostly. Our mother has always loved Charlotte with a kind of intensity I never understood. She shields her, defends her, excuses her. Even when Charlotte is clearly wrong, even when she's cruel, even when she hurts people, and she has hurt people. She's hurt me for years, but I never thought she would hurt me in a way that could have killed me. Not until the day she reached behind my head and tightened my neck brace like she was tying a ribbon. It started with a car accident. 2 weeks before everything happened, I was driving home from work when someone rear-ended me on the freeway. It wasn't the kind of accident that makes headlines. No flipped cars, no ambulance lights. Just one loud impact, my head snapping forward, and the sudden sickening realization that my neck didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. The doctor said it was a sprain, not life-threatening, but serious enough to require a neck brace and strict instructions. No pressure, he warned, no twisting, no sudden tightening, and absolutely no messing with the brace. I nodded. I listened. I followed every rule, because that's who I am. I'm the woman who follows rules, who documents everything, who keeps receipts, who double-checks signatures, who makes sure every dollar is accounted for. I didn't become that way by accident. I became that way because 10 years ago, I trusted the wrong person and it cost me everything I'd saved. Back then, I fell in love with a man who called himself David. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who made me feel like I was finally visible after a lifetime of being overlooked. I was certain I was going to marry him. Then one morning, I woke up and he was gone. Gone along with $15,000 I'd saved over 3 years. I never told my family. I was too ashamed. I just picked up the pieces and made myself a promise. Never again. Never trust anyone that completely. Never let anyone get close enough to destroy you. That promise shaped everything about who I am now. And it's why I knew something was wrong the moment Charlotte walked into my apartment and laughed at my brace like it was a costume. She showed up on a Friday evening, uninvited, holding a bag of takeout like she was doing me a favor. I remember how she looked the second she stepped inside. Eyes bright, smile too sharp, like she wasn't there to check on me. She was there to evaluate me, to measure what I had, to see what she could poke at. "Wow," she said, staring at the brace. "You look like a tragic heroine in a cheap movie." I didn't laugh. My neck ached. My ribs ached. Even breathing deeply hurt. Charlotte drifted around my apartment like she owned it, touching things with her fingertips. She made comments about how small it was, how quiet it was, how sadly organized everything looked. "You've always been like this," she said, "even when we were kids. Always so serious, always trying to be perfect." I didn't answer. I didn't have the energy to fight. I should have asked her to leave. But in our family, I was raised to do something different. I was raised to tolerate. Charlotte sat on my couch, opened the takeout, and ate like she belonged there, like she hadn't ignored me for weeks, like she hadn't insulted me the moment she walked in. Then, halfway through her meal, she stood up and came behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I was reaching for a glass of water. My back was turned. And then I felt her fingers. They slipped under the strap of my neck brace, right where the Velcro fastened it. I froze. I didn't even have time to ask what she was doing before she pulled. Hard. The brace tightened instantly around my throat, pressing into the front of my neck. It wasn't like someone gently squeezing. It was like a sudden clamp, like my airway had been shut off with one casual movement. I tried to inhale, and nothing happened. My chest lifted, my lungs begged, but the air didn't come. Panic hit so fast it felt like electricity. My hands flew up, but my fingers fumbled. Clumsy from fear, my vision narrowed, my eyes watered. I heard myself make a sound, half gasp, half choke, like an animal caught in a trap. And behind me, Charlotte laughed. "Relax," she said, still pulling. "It's just a joke." A joke. That word didn't make sense in the moment, because my body was screaming at me that I was dying. I clawed at the strap, tried to peel the Velcro loose, but my hands were shaking too hard. I twisted, hitting her arm, trying to force her away. Finally, she let go. I collapsed forward against the counter, coughing so violently I thought I might vomit. I sucked in air like I'd been underwater. My heart slammed against my ribs. Charlotte stared at me like I'd ruined her fun. "Oh my God," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're fine. Don't be so sensitive." I couldn't stop shaking. I wasn't just afraid. I was stunned. Because that moment made something painfully clear. Charlotte didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a target. She sat back down on my couch and kept eating, completely unbothered. No apology, no guilt, no concern. And I stood there, one hand gripping my brace like it might betray me again, thinking, what kind of person laughs while their sister can't breathe? That should have been the moment I cut her out of my life completely. But then my phone buzzed. A notification from my credit monitoring service. New inquiry detected. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, feeling the cold creep back in, not into my throat, but into my gut. I told myself it was a coincidence, a glitch, a random scam attempt. But then I remembered something. Charlotte had wandered near my desk earlier, near the locked drawer where I kept important documents. And before she left, she had stood by my bookshelf for a long moment, fingers brushing the spines like she was looking for something. After she walked out, I checked my drawer. Still locked. But my spare key, the one I hid behind a book, was gone. I sat down slowly. My throat still hurt. My hands still trembled. And in that quiet apartment, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding my entire life. Charlotte hadn't come to see if I was okay. She came to see what she could take. And the neck brace wasn't just a joke. It was a warning, a preview, because she wasn't only tightening something around my throat, she was tightening something around my life, and I was about to find out just how long she'd been doing it. The worst part wasn't even the pain in my throat afterward. It was what came after Charlotte left, what the silence revealed. I stood in my kitchen for a long time with my hand still pressed against the front of my neck brace, as if I was afraid it might tighten again on its own. My body kept replaying the moment like a glitch. The sudden pressure, the panic, the sound I made when I couldn't breathe, and Charlotte's laugh. That laugh was what stayed with me. Not because it was loud, but because it was casual. Like she'd done something harmless. Like my fear had been entertainment. When she finally walked out, she didn't slam the door, she didn't storm off, she simply left the way she always did, like she had won something, like she had proven a point, like she had reminded me who she was in our family and who I was supposed to be, the one who endures. I locked the door behind her, then locked it again. It sounds ridiculous, but I needed to hear the click twice to calm my nerves. Then I sat down at my desk and stared at my phone. The credit monitoring alert was still glowing on the screen. New inquiry detected. A small thing, technically. Just a notification. But it hit me like a cold hand wrapping around my spine, because it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was just the first time it happened right after Charlotte touched something that belonged to me. I opened my laptop and pulled up my credit report. Most people don't do that in the middle of a Friday night after almost being choked by their sister. Most people would cry, or call a friend, or pour a glass of wine and try to forget it. But I'm not most people. I've been living in survival mode since I was 18, and survival mode doesn't let you forget it. Survival mode says, check, verify, document, prove. I started with the basics. TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, one by one. I expected to see a random inquiry from some bank, something I could dispute, something annoying but manageable. Instead, I saw things that made my stomach slowly twist into a knot. There were accounts I didn't recognize, not brand new ones, not just one, old ones. A credit card opened years ago, a personal loan application, a store card I had never used, a strange address attached to one of them, an address I didn't recognize at first. Then it hit me. I knew that street. I had dropped Charlotte off there once, years ago, when she was staying with a friend. She had asked me for a ride because she didn't have a car. I remember because she complained the entire time about how my car smelled like boring adulthood. My hands started shaking. I stared at the screen and felt that familiar sensation, the one I hadn't felt in a decade. The feeling of realizing you've been fooled. 10 years ago, I had been fooled by a man who called himself David. I hadn't thought about him in years. I had forced myself not to. But that night, sitting alone in my apartment, throat sore and mind racing, the memory surfaced like a bruise being pressed. He had been charming, warm, patient. He had looked at me like I mattered. After a childhood of being invisible, that kind of attention felt like oxygen. I was 25. I was working my first serious job. I was saving money carefully, building a future piece by piece. David told me I was different from other women, that I was strong, that I was the kind of person you could build a life with. And I believed him. I believed him so much that when he suggested we combine savings to plan a wedding, I didn't hesitate. When he asked for access to my account to help manage the budget, I handed it over. When he said he wanted to surprise me with a honeymoon, I let him. Then one morning, I woke up and he was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just empty space on the pillow beside me and the sickening realization that my savings $15,000 were gone too. I never told my family. I couldn't, because in my family, mistakes were not met with comfort. Mistakes were met with judgment. Charlotte would have laughed. My mother would have said I should have been smarter. My father would have said nothing. So I swallowed it. I rebuilt my life. I made a promise I would never be that vulnerable again. And I kept that promise. I became the kind of woman who doesn't trust easily, who lives alone, who keeps her documents locked away, who reads every fine print clause, who notices tiny inconsistencies in handwriting. It wasn't a personality trait. It was armor. A few years after David vanished, I received a letter from a bank I'd never used. It thanked me for opening a credit account I hadn't opened. I called immediately. The bank told me it was resolved, probably an error. They said not to worry. I let it go, but I kept the letter. Old habits. That night, I pulled out that folder, the one labeled just in case. I hadn't opened it in years. When I unfolded the letter, my fingers went numb, because the date on the letter matched the date of one of the accounts on my report. It hadn't been resolved. It had been buried. I sat there staring at the evidence, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. This wasn't a random scam. This wasn't a glitch. This was a pattern, and patterns have origins. My mind jumped backward through memories like a file cabinet being yanked open. I thought about Thanksgiving, about Charlotte stepping outside to take that phone call, about her arguing with someone in a voice I didn't recognize, sharp and urgent. I remembered hearing her say something like, "She doesn't suspect anything." I remembered asking if she was okay and her snapping at me with ice in her eyes. "Mind your own business. Not everything is about you." I remembered my mother watching the exchange like she was holding her breath, and I remembered the box. The cardboard box my mother had shoved into the closet while I was cleaning dishes. She had moved too fast, smiled too tightly. And when I caught a glimpse inside, I saw something that didn't belong there. An envelope with my name, documents that looked like my old Social Security card. Things I hadn't seen in years. At the time, I didn't push. Because in my family, pushing always made you the villain. But now, after Charlotte's joke, after the missing spare key, after the credit report, after the old letter, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I checked my bookshelf. The book behind which I hid my spare key was slightly out of alignment. The spine was turned just a little. Most people wouldn't notice, but I notice. I pulled it out. The key wasn't there. My throat tightened again, not from the brace, but from something colder. Charlotte had taken it, and if Charlotte had taken the key, that meant she had access. Not just to my apartment, to my life. I walked to my desk and opened the locked drawer. I checked every document. Passport, birth certificate copy, tax records, everything looked intact. But then, I remembered something my doctor had told me after the accident. Stress slows healing, he'd said. Try to stay calm. I almost laughed. Because how do you stay calm when you realize your sister might have been stealing from you for years? I sat back down and stared at my phone. Part of me wanted to call Charlotte immediately. Demand answers. Accuse her. Scream. But another part of me, the part that had survived David, the part that had rebuilt a life from betrayal, knew better. People like Charlotte don't confess when confronted. They attack. They cry. They twist the story until you become the aggressor. And in my family, Charlotte always wins that game. My mother always believes her. My father always stays silent. So instead of calling her, I did something else. I started building a file, a timeline, dates, addresses, account numbers, credit inquiries, screenshots. I printed everything and placed it into a binder, the way I would if I were preparing evidence for court. Because deep down, I already knew where this was headed. Charlotte didn't tighten my neck brace because she was playful. She tightened it because she wanted to remind me of something. That she had power over me. And the most terrifying part was this. If she was bold enough to do that while standing in my apartment, looking me in the eye afterward like I was pathetic, then whatever she was doing behind my back had probably been going on far longer than I wanted to admit. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. And I kept thinking the same thought, over and over. What else has she taken? Because I had always assumed my biggest betrayal happened 10 years ago, when a man stole my savings and vanished. But now, with my throat still sore and my spare key missing, I was starting to realize something much worse. The man who betrayed me might have been a stranger. But the person who was about to destroy me shared my blood. I used to believe the worst part of betrayal was the moment you discovered it. I was wrong. The worst part is the week afterward when the betrayal doesn't just hurt your feelings. It starts dismantling your life piece by piece, like someone calmly unbolting the foundation while you're still standing on it. The morning after Charlotte left my apartment, my throat still felt raw. Every time I swallowed, I remembered her fingers under the strap. I tried to tell myself it had been a stupid impulse, the kind of cruelty she would later laugh off. But my body didn't accept that story. My body remembered the panic, and my mind was already working. I called all 3 credit bureaus and placed freezes. I filed disputes on every unfamiliar inquiry. I pulled old bank statements. I changed passwords. I enabled 2-factor authentication on everything. I updated security questions to answers nobody could guess. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called the bank that had sent me that old letter. After navigating automated menus and being transferred twice, I finally reached a human being. I gave my name, my social, my date of birth. The representative went quiet. "Miss Hayes," she said carefully, "I do see an account in your name from several years ago. It's closed now." "I didn't open it," I said. She hesitated. "It was opened in person." "In person?" My voice came out sharp. "Yes," she said. "With ID verification." My hands tightened around the phone, because the only way that could happen was if someone had my documents, and the only person who had ever had access to my documents outside of me was my family. I hung up and sat in silence, staring at the binder on my desk. The timeline was already growing. The pattern was already undeniable. But even with all that evidence, I still wasn't prepared for how quickly everything would collapse. It started with a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered and heard my mother's voice, loud and frantic. "Rachel," she shouted, not even saying hello. What did you do? I blinked. What are you talking about? Charlotte is missing, she cried. She's gone. She hasn't been home. She's not answering her phone. And she told us days ago she was in trouble. She said she was going to ask you for help. My stomach dropped. She asked me, I said slowly. She came to my apartment. And, my mother demanded, and you turned your back on her, didn't you? You refused her. You punished her because you've always been jealous of her. The word jealous hit me like a slap. Jealous. Of Charlotte, who had never worked a day she didn't want to. Who had been protected, funded, forgiven. Who could hurt people and still be wrapped in our mother's love like a blanket. Mom, I said, forcing my voice steady. Charlotte tightened my neck brace until I couldn't breathe. Silence. Then, in a tone so cold it made my skin prickle, my mother said, "She would never hurt you." My throat tightened again, not from the brace, from the realization that my mother's loyalty wasn't based on truth. It was based on fear. "Listen to me," I said, my voice shaking now. "She also stole my spare key, and there are accounts in my name tied to her old addresses. This isn't about jealousy. This is about—" "Stop," my mother snapped. "Stop making everything about you. Charlotte is in danger." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully familiar. Charlotte's crisis always mattered more than my reality. I took a breath. "I'm not refusing to help," I said carefully. "But I'm not sending money. Not anymore. Not until I know what's going on." My mother made a sound like she was choking on rage. "If something happens to her," she hissed, "if she hurts herself because you wouldn't help her, I will never forgive you. Never." And then she hung up. For a moment, I just stood there in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the deadline. In the background, just before the call ended, I had heard my father's voice. He said nothing. He never does. I sat down at my table and stared at the wall. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to cry. But the part of me that had survived for years without anyone catching me when I fell stayed calm. Because something in my gut was telling me that Charlotte wasn't missing. Charlotte was hiding. And she was hiding for a reason. 2 days later, the reason arrived at my doorstep. It was early, not quite 8 in the morning. I was in sweatpants, hair still damp from a shower. My neck brace tightened the way the doctor instructed. The knock wasn't friendly. It was firm, official. I opened the door and froze. 2 police officers stood in the hallway, and between them was a woman in a blazer holding a folder, her expression composed in a way that made my blood turn cold. "Rachel Hayes?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Special Agent Sarah Morrison," she said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words didn't feel real. FBI belonged to crime documentaries, not my quiet apartment with its neatly labeled files and carefully folded towels. I swallowed. "Is this about Charlotte?" Agent Morrison's eyes flicked briefly to my neck brace. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Car accident," I said automatically. Then I hesitated, and something inside me decided I was done protecting my family's image. And my sister thought it was funny to tighten this until I couldn't breathe. One of the officers shifted slightly, like he hadn't expected that. Morrison's gaze sharpened. Then she opened her folder. "We're investigating a large-scale investment fraud scheme," she said calmly. "Multiple victims across 3 states. Approximately $250,000 stolen through fraudulent investment accounts." My stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. "And your name," she continued, "and your social security number appear on multiple accounts connected to this fraud." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible," I whispered. I don't." "We're not making accusations at this time," Morrison said, "but I need to inform you that you are currently a person of interest in this investigation." Person of interest. Those words landed like a weight on my chest. I heard myself say, "But I'm an accountant. I work for." "We have already interviewed your sister," Morrison said. 4 days ago." My heart stopped. "Charlotte, interviewed 4 days ago." She stated, Morrison continued, her voice steady, "that you are the mastermind behind the operation. She claims you forced her to participate and used her identity to hide your involvement. I stared at her, unable to breathe for a different reason now. It felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. My sister wasn't just stealing from me. She was framing me. She was setting me up to take the fall for a federal crime. My hands began to shake. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out right. "That's not true," I said finally. "I didn't do any of this. I don't even know what accounts you're talking about." Morrison watched me closely, like she was measuring whether my fear was guilt or shock. "We will need to review your financial access logs, employment records, and communications," she said. "We will be in touch to schedule a formal interview. I strongly recommend you retain legal counsel." Legal counsel. The phrase made me feel like I was watching my life through glass. One of the officers stepped forward slightly. "Do you have any weapons in the home?" he asked. I blinked at him. "No," I said. "I have a calculator. It came out before I could stop it." The officer didn't smile. But Agent Morrison's mouth twitched, just barely, like she understood something about me in that moment. A woman who makes a joke like that, while being accused of fraud, isn't thinking like a criminal. She's thinking like someone trying not to break. They left after 10 minutes. 10 minutes! That's all it took for my world to change. The moment the door closed, I leaned against it and slid to the floor. My neck brace pressed against my throat, and suddenly I couldn't tell which pressure was physical and which was emotional. I sat there shaking, staring at my hands. Then I forced myself to stand, because crying wouldn't protect me. Panic wouldn't clear my name. And Charlotte, wherever she was counting on me to fall apart. She wanted me to look guilty. She wanted me to be too overwhelmed to fight back. But she didn't know one thing. She didn't know that the night she tightened my neck brace and laughed wasn't the only time she had made a mistake. Because I had been documenting everything, and I was about to start fighting like my life depended on it. Because now, it did. After the FBI left my apartment, I didn't sit down and cry the way people expect you to. I didn't call a friend. I didn't post anything online. I didn't even call my mother back. I did what I've always done when something tries to destroy me. I opened my laptop. I printed everything. I started building a case file. Because the terrifying thing about being framed is this. You don't just have to prove you're innocent. You have to prove someone else is guilty without looking like you're desperate, vindictive, or unstable. And Charlotte knew that. She knew my entire life was built on being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who doesn't make scenes. She was counting on me to freeze, but I didn't freeze. I worked. I pulled my full credit reports again and highlighted every unfamiliar account. I logged dates and addresses. I matched them to places Charlotte had lived. I listed every credit inquiry, every bank notice, every email I'd ever received about suspicious activity. I printed screenshots of the credit monitoring alerts from the last week. Then I opened a new document and typed one line at the top. Timeline of identity theft and fraud activity. Underneath, I started from the earliest incident I could remember, the strange bank letter from years ago. I wrote the date. I wrote the bank's name. I wrote the phone call where they told me it was resolved. And I wrote what I knew now. It wasn't resolved. It was just the beginning. The more I documented, the more a pattern emerged. Not just a financial pattern, a behavioral one. Charlotte didn't steal in moments of panic. She stole as a lifestyle. She stole as casually as she breathed. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Agent Morrison's face at my door. I heard the phrase "person of interest" echoing like a sentence already written. In the morning, my phone rang. It was my workplace. I stared at the screen for a full second before answering, already knowing what was coming. "Rachel," my director said gently. Too gently. "Can you come into my office today? HR needs to speak with you." I swallowed. "Is this about the FBI?" A pause. "Yes," he admitted. The drive to the office felt surreal. The streets looked normal. People walked dogs. Someone was watering plants outside an apartment building. The world was moving like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, my life was cracking in half. When I arrived, HR was waiting. My director sat beside them, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. The HR woman spoke in the kind of tone people use when they're trying to sound compassionate while still protecting the company. "This is administrative," she said. "Standard procedure. You're being placed on leave, pending the outcome of the investigation." Leave. The word sounded harmless, but it wasn't. It meant, "We don't trust you." It meant, "Your reputation is now a question mark." It meant, "You might not get your life back even if you're innocent." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. My throat tightened, and for a moment I thought about the neck brace, about how Charlotte had tightened it and called it a joke. This felt like the same thing. A slow, deliberate tightening around my future. I packed my desk in silence. 8 years at that firm, 8 years of spotless work, not a single complaint, not a single audit issue, not a single error big enough to matter. And now I was walking out with a cardboard box of personal items like I was a criminal. My coworkers didn't stare openly. They pretended to focus on their screens. But I could feel the attention, the curiosity, the quiet judgment. I was almost at the elevator when someone stepped into my path, Linda Chen. She was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled into a neat bun, eyes sharp and kind. She had transferred to our department a few years back. I had trained her. We had eaten lunch together almost every week since. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look afraid of me. She simply held out a business card. "A criminal defense attorney," she said softly. I blinked. "Linda, I've known you for 8 years," she said. "You are the most honest person in this building. Whatever this is, you fight it. And when you need someone to testify about your character, you call me. I mean it." For the first time in days, I felt tears press behind my eyes. Not because I was sad, because I wasn't completely alone. I went home and called the attorney. His name was Thomas Avery. His voice was calm, direct, the kind of man who didn't waste words. He listened as I explained everything. The FBI visit, Charlotte's accusation, the identity theft, the missing documents, the neck brace incident. When I mentioned that, he went quiet. "Your sister tightened your medical brace until you couldn't breathe?" he repeated. "Yes," I said, and she laughed. "That matters," he said. "How?" I asked, confused. "It establishes intent," he said. "Not just financial intent, psychological intent. It supports a pattern of coercion and cruelty. It may not be the central crime, but it paints the picture of who she is and what she's capable of." I sat back in my chair, stunned. For the first time, someone was looking at the whole story, not just the bank accounts. He told me to bring every document I had, every screenshot, every letter, every timeline. So I did. I organized everything into a binder, so clean it could have been a textbook. I labeled sections. I created tabs. I included dates, names, and references. I printed call logs from my phone. I printed the credit monitoring alerts. I included a photo of the missing spare key spot on my shelf. And then I did something else. I opened my phone's voice recorder because I had something Charlotte didn't know I had. The night she tightened my neck brace, she had been careless. She had been cruel. But she had also been overconfident. And overconfidence makes people sloppy. When she walked out of my apartment, she had muttered under her breath quietly, but not quietly enough. "You're so easy," she had said. "Always have been." At the time, I hadn't responded. I hadn't even moved. But my phone had captured it. It wasn't much, but it was her voice, her tone, her contempt. And in a case built on credibility, contempt matters. 2 weeks later, the FBI called again. Agent Morrison's voice was the same calm professionalism, but there was something sharper underneath now. "We're scheduling your formal interview," she said. "You'll come to the Philadelphia field office. You may bring counsel." I exhaled slowly. My attorney told me not to speak unless asked, not to ramble, not to speculate, not to accuse without evidence. "Let the facts do the work," he said. "You're an accountant. Facts are your language." On the day of the interview, I dressed like I was going to court. Not flashy, not defensive, professional, neutral. When I walked into the FBI building, the air felt different, cold, controlled, like the entire place was designed to strip you down to the truth. I checked in at the front desk. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. It beat like it was trying to escape my ribs. A man led me down a hallway of glass partitions and closed doors. And then I saw her, Charlotte, sitting in a conference room down the hall, visible through the glass. She looked up as I passed, and our eyes met. She smiled. Not a scared smile, not a guilty smile, a satisfied one, like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. That smile hit me harder than the FBI accusation, because it confirmed what I had been trying not to believe. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't about Mark. This wasn't even about fraud. This was personal. Charlotte wasn't running from the consequences. She was trying to hand them to me. I kept walking, my lawyer beside me, my binder heavy in my hands. But inside, something shifted. A kind of fear I had never felt before hardened into something else. Resolve. Because Charlotte thought she had already won. She thought she had tightened the trap so perfectly that I would choke financially, legally, emotionally. But she didn't know what I had in my binder. She didn't know what I had in my phone. And she didn't know what I had spent 10 years building inside myself after the first con man stole my savings and vanished. I had spent a decade learning how to protect myself. And now, with my freedom on the line, I was about to use every single lesson. The FBI interview room was colder than I expected. Not physically, though. The air conditioning was sharp enough to raise goosebumps on my arms, but emotionally. The whole building felt like it was designed to strip you down until all that remained was truth, or whatever version of truth someone could prove. Agent Sarah Morrison sat across from me at a plain table. My attorney, Thomas Avery, sat beside me. A small recording device rested in the center of the table, already running. Morrison's expression was neutral, but her eyes were alert, like she had learned to recognize lies the way I recognize discrepancies in financial statements. She slid a folder toward me. "Miss Hayes," she said, "we're going to begin by reviewing your sister's statement." I took a breath and opened it. The first page was Charlotte's written account, typed and formatted like something she had rehearsed a dozen times. As I read, my stomach tightened. According to Charlotte, I had always been the controlling one in the family. The smart one, the one who handled money, who made decisions, who kept everyone in line. She claimed I had approached her 2 years ago with an investment opportunity. She said I told her it was legal, but that I needed her name on some accounts for tax purposes. Then came the part that made my hands go cold. Charlotte claimed she didn't understand what she was signing, but she trusted me because I was her big sister. She said she only realized later that the investments were fake, and when she tried to stop, she claimed I threatened her. I stared at the page, my jaw tightening. Charlotte had always been good at one thing: acting. She knew exactly when to cry, exactly when to soften her voice, exactly how to tilt her head so she looked innocent instead of manipulative. Growing up, she could break something, blame me, and have my mother believe her before I even opened my mouth. And now she was doing it on a federal level. Morrison watched me carefully. "Do you want to respond?" she asked. I looked up slowly. "That statement is fiction," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "She's trying to save herself by handing you a villain. And she chose me because she knows no one in my family will defend me." Morrison didn't react. She simply opened another folder and spread documents across the table. Bank accounts opened in my name, investment accounts promising 15% returns, loan applications, wire transfer records, a paper trail so clean it looked deliberate. My heart sank as I scanned the pages. Some of the signatures looked like mine. Not perfect, but close enough that I understood why they were suspicious. Morrison tapped one of the forms. "These signatures match samples we have of your handwriting," she said. My mouth went dry. I stared at the ink. The loops, the slant. For a second, panic surged up my throat. The same panic I had felt when Charlotte tightened my brace. I forced myself to breathe. Then I leaned forward. "May I?" I asked. Morrison nodded. I picked up the page and studied it the way I would study a ledger during an audit, not with emotion, with precision. And then I saw it, the capital R. My signature has a habit, It always has. I start my capital R from the bottom loop and sweep upward. I've done it that way since I was a child. It's muscle memory, something I couldn't change even if I tried. These signatures started from the top and curved down. I looked at another form, and another. Then I noticed the spacing between my first and last name. In my signature, I always leave a consistent gap almost exactly the width of 2 letters. I've never known why. It's just how my hand moves. On these forms, the names were crowded together. The spacing was wrong. My pulse slowed, not because I felt safe, because I felt something else. Clarity. These are forged, I said quietly. Morrison studied me for a moment. You're confident, she said. I'm an accountant, I replied. Details are my job. Noticing what doesn't match is what I do every single day. Morrison's pen moved across her notepad. We'll have forensic document analysis confirm, she said. But your observation aligns with inconsistencies we've seen. For the first time since the FBI knocked on my door, I felt the slightest shift in the room. Not trust, but possibility, Morrison continued. We also have evidence tying these accounts to multiple IP addresses, she said. Most of them trace to locations associated with your sister's residences. Some trace to hotels, some trace to prepaid mobile hotspots. My stomach clenched again. Charlotte wasn't just reckless, she was organized. Or someone was organizing her. Morrison slid one final item across the table. A photograph. Do you recognize this man? She asked. I looked down, and the world tilted. The man in the photo had a familiar smile. A smile that once made me feel like I was safe, like I was chosen, like I mattered. He looked older now. A few more lines, a little gray at the temples. But it was him, David, the man I had almost married, the man who vanished with my savings, the man who taught me what betrayal felt like. Except the file name under the photo read, Mark Lawson. My breath caught. My hands started shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the table. Morrison's voice sounded distant. He's been identified as your sister's boyfriend and the likely orchestrator of this scheme, real name Mark Lawson. Prior fraud convictions in Arizona and Nevada. I stared at the photo like it might change if I blinked. He didn't just target my sister, I whispered. He targeted me first. Morrison's eyebrows rose. You have a prior history with him, she said. I swallowed hard. 10 years ago, I said, voice shaking now. He called himself David. He made me believe he loved me. I was going to marry him. And then he disappeared with $15,000. My attorney shifted beside me. I felt him watching me closely, like he was measuring how this new information would affect the case. Morrison wrote something down, her expression sharpening. You never reported it? She asked. No, I admitted, shame burning my cheeks. I was embarrassed. I thought it was my fault. I thought I deserved it for being stupid. Morrison looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. This changes the profile of the case significantly. She leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing in thought. If Mark Lawson targeted you before, she continued, then it's possible your sister's involvement is more complicated than we believed. It suggests he may have been using her, or that she may have sought him out deliberately. I stared at her, because the thought made my blood run cold. Had Charlotte known? Had she recognized him from the past? Had she chosen him on purpose? Or had Mark chosen her because she was the easiest route back to me? Morrison slid another set of documents toward me. These accounts don't start 2 years ago, she said. They start 6 years ago. 6 years. My throat tightened. Because 6 years ago, Charlotte had lived at that address on my credit report. 6 years ago was when my original Social Security card had gone missing. 6 years ago was when my mother had started acting nervous whenever I asked about paperwork. Morrison's voice was calm, but her words hit like a hammer. Credit cards you never applied for, she said. A car loan you never signed. Personal loans, missed payments, collections, all traced back to your sister. I sat frozen. The identity theft didn't start with Mark. It started with Charlotte. Mark was just the escalation, the weapon, the man who helped her go bigger. My attorney cleared his throat. Agent Morrison, he said, based on what we're seeing, My client is a victim of aggravated identity theft and conspiracy. We'd like to discuss formal victim status. Morrison nodded slowly. We're not there yet, she said. But Miss Hayes, I will tell you this. Your case is shifting. Shifting. I held onto that word like a lifeline. Then I remembered something I had been holding back. Not because I wanted to protect Charlotte, but because I was afraid it would make me look reckless. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I have something else, I said. Morrison's eyes sharpened again. What is it? A recording, I said, from the night Charlotte came to my apartment. My attorney glanced at me, but he didn't stop me. He had already heard it. I placed the phone on the table and played the audio. Charlotte's voice, mocking. You're so easy. Always have been. Then the sound of her laugh. It wasn't long. It wasn't a confession, but it was something the FBI couldn't ignore. The room listened in silence. When it ended, Morrison looked at me differently. Not like a suspect. Like someone who had been preparing for this fight longer than she realized. You came prepared, she said quietly. I nodded. I've spent 10 years learning to protect myself, I said. After what Mark did to me the first time, I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again. Morrison leaned back, tapping her pen against her notepad. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something inside me shift. Because Charlotte had smiled through the glass like she had already won. But now the FBI had Mark's face. Now they had the timeline. Now they had the pattern. And now, finally, someone in authority was starting to see the truth. I wasn't the mastermind. I was the target. And the people who had been tightening the trap around my life were about to realize I wasn't going to choke quietly. After the FBI interview, I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour. I didn't turn the engine on. I didn't check my phone. I didn't even cry. I just stared at my hands resting on the steering wheel, watching them tremble like they belonged to someone else. Because the interview hadn't just shaken me, it had rearranged my entire understanding of my life. For weeks, I had been drowning in fear of prison, fear of losing my career, fear of being branded a criminal. But now the fear had changed shape. Now I was afraid of something worse. The truth. The truth that this hadn't started with Mark. It hadn't started with a con man or a fake boyfriend or a sudden scheme. It had started inside my own family, 6 years ago. And if Charlotte had been stealing my identity for 6 years, then every uncomfortable moment I'd ever brushed aside, every strange silence, every "don't be paranoid" comment from my mother, suddenly had a new meaning. I drove home slowly, my mind replaying details like surveillance footage, the box in the closet at Thanksgiving, the envelope with my name, my mother stepping in front of it too quickly, my father's eyes downcast, Charlotte's icy smile when I asked questions. All of it had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I called my father, not my mother, not Charlotte. My father, because if anyone in that house knew the truth, it was the man who had spent 35 years watching it happen in silence. He answered on the second ring. "Rachel," he said cautiously, as if he'd been expecting my call. "Dad," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I need your help. I need you to stop being silent." He didn't respond. I continued before he could. "That box Mom hid at Thanksgiving," I said. "I saw my documents inside, my social security card, my birth certificate. You know what's in it. You know what Charlotte has been doing. And now the FBI is involved. She's trying to frame me for federal crimes." I heard his breath catch. "I need the truth," I said. "Not later. Not when it's convenient. Now." The line stayed quiet for so long I thought he might hang up. Then he spoke. His voice was heavy with exhaustion. "Come to the house tomorrow," he said. "Come alone." My throat tightened. "Mom can't know?" I asked. "No," he said. "She'll never forgive me. But you deserve it." I barely slept. I kept imagining Charlotte somewhere smiling, confident that she had tightened the trap around me perfectly. I imagined my mother still defending her, still convinced her baby was innocent. I imagined the FBI moving forward with evidence that looked like mine, signatures that almost matched, accounts that used my name like a mask. And underneath all of it, I kept hearing Charlotte's laugh from behind my neck. That casual, careless laugh. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. The house I had left at 18 and never truly returned to. My father was sitting on the front porch with a cardboard box in his lap. His eyes were red. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. For a moment, seeing him like that, smaller, older, worn down, made something ache inside me. Because for years I had blamed him for being weak, for doing nothing, for letting my mother's favoritism swallow the family whole. But now, as he held that box like it weighed 100 pounds, I realized something. Maybe he hadn't been weak. Maybe he had been trapped. "Your mother doesn't know I'm showing you this," he said quietly as I walked up. "She thinks I'm running errands." He didn't invite me inside. Instead, he stood and led me to his truck. We drove a mile away and parked at a gas station, like two criminals meeting to exchange contraband. When he opened the box, my stomach dropped. Inside was my entire identity. My original birth certificate, creased and yellowed. My social security card, the one I had assumed was lost years ago when I moved apartments. Documents I had searched for, replaced, and then forgotten about. But they hadn't been lost. They had been taken. I lifted the papers with shaking hands. Underneath them were stacks of letters tied with rubber bands. Dozens of letters, all written in Charlotte's handwriting. They weren't addressed to me. They were addressed to relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family, friends. Each letter was a different lie. Charlotte claimed she had a medical emergency and needed money for surgery. Charlotte claimed she was escaping an abusive boyfriend and needed cash for a deposit. Charlotte claimed her wallet was stolen and she needed money to get through the week. Charlotte claimed she had a job opportunity but needed to pay for training up front. Some letters had responses attached, handwritten notes from relatives, confused and worried, asking my parents if Charlotte was okay. As I flipped through them, my hands started shaking harder. I looked up at my father. "You knew," I said. His jaw tightened. "I started collecting them 5 years ago," he said. His voice was hollow. "Your Aunt May called me. She asked why Charlotte needed $3,000 for a surgery she never had. She said she sent the check weeks earlier." He swallowed. That's when I realized it wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. I stared at the letters. 5 years? He had been holding this evidence for 5 years. "You let it go on," I whispered. "I tried to stop it," he said quickly, his voice cracking. "I tried, but your mother wouldn't see it. Every time I brought it up, she shut down. She threatened to leave me. She accused me of being cruel to a child who needed protection." "Charlotte is 31, I said, my voice sharp. "She's not a child." My father stared out the windshield at nothing. "To your mother," he said quietly. "She'll always be that baby." I looked down at my social security card again. "How did she get this?" I asked. My father's shoulders sagged. 6 years ago, he said, "Charlotte told your mother she needed your social security card for a job application. Paperwork. She promised she'd bring it right back." He paused, then said the words that shattered something inside me. "Your mother watched her take it." I stopped breathing for a moment. It was like the neck brace all over again. Pressure, panic, disbelief. My mother watched. She knew. She didn't stop her. She didn't warn me. She didn't protect me. She protected Charlotte. My father didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His silence confirmed it. Something in me went very still. For years, I had tried to convince myself my mother was just misguided, that she meant well, that she loved me in her own way, even if she favored Charlotte. But now I understood. Favoritism wasn't the word. Complicity was. I swallowed hard. "Why?" I asked. "Why would she let her do this to me?" My father's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He opened his mouth, then stopped. His eyes looked haunted. "She almost," he began. Then he shut his mouth. I leaned forward, heart pounding. "She almost what?" I demanded. He shook his head, jaw clenched. "That's not my secret to tell," he said. "But you should ask your mother. After this is over, when the dust settles, ask her why she could never say no to Charlotte." I stared at him. My mind flashed back to years ago, when I had jokingly asked my mother why Charlotte always got away with everything. My mother's face had gone white, You don't understand what I almost, she had started to say. Then she stopped herself and walked out of the room. At the time, I thought it was guilt. Now, sitting in that truck, holding the evidence of my stolen identity, I realized it was fear. Fear of something she had done, or almost done. I looked back down at the box, at the letters, at the stolen documents, and suddenly, the entire story became clear. Charlotte hadn't just stolen my identity. She had stolen my mother too. She had turned my mother's guilt into a shield, and my father's silence into a weapon. I closed the box carefully. My hands stopped trembling, not because I felt calm, but because something inside me hardened. I had spent my whole life being the one who endured, the one who stayed quiet, the one who didn't make waves. But now my freedom was on the line. My career, my name, my life. I looked at my father and said, "I'm taking this to the FBI." His eyes filled with tears. He nodded once. "I know," he whispered. "And I'm sorry. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't." I got out of the truck carrying the box like it was evidence and grief in equal weight. I drove straight to the FBI field office and handed it over to Agent Morrison. When she opened it and saw the documents, the letters, the timeline, her face tightened. "This," she said quietly, "is exactly what we needed." I stood there, exhausted, throat sore, heart bruised, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't fear. It was power. Because Charlotte had spent 6 years tightening a trap around me, but she had made one mistake. She had underestimated what happens when the invisible daughter finally stops being invisible. When I handed that box to the FBI, I expected relief. I thought I would feel lighter, like I had finally dropped the weight that had been crushing my chest for weeks, but relief didn't come. What came instead was something colder. Because the moment the evidence left my hands, I understood that this was no longer just my family's secret. It was a federal case. It was a war with paperwork, timelines, and consequences that couldn't be softened by apologies. And Charlotte was about to realize, for the first time in her life, that my mother's love couldn't protect her from the law. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. Agent Morrison kept me updated, carefully, professionally. She didn't give me every detail, but she gave me enough to understand what was happening behind the scenes. The box my father gave me became a turning point. Those letters, dozens of them, weren't just proof that Charlotte had been scamming relatives for years. They showed intent. They showed pattern. They showed a mind that wasn't simply impulsive or desperate. Charlotte was practiced. She was comfortable lying, and the stolen documents proved something even worse. She hadn't just taken my identity. She had taken it from inside my parents' home, with my mother watching. That detail, my mother's complicity, became a quiet bomb in the investigation. Not because my mother was being charged, but because it explained how Charlotte had operated for so long without resistance. She had never been forced to stop. She had never been told no. She had never faced consequences. So when Mark entered her life, it wasn't like he created the monster. He just handed her better tools. The prosecutors pulled cloud backups from phones and laptops. They recovered text messages spanning months' conversations between Charlotte and Mark that were so cruel I felt sick reading them later. Mark had tried to paint himself as the mastermind, the professional con artist who manipulated a vulnerable woman. Charlotte's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim too. They both wanted the same thing, a narrative that made them look less guilty. But the messages didn't support either story. The messages showed something uglier. They showed partnership. They showed excitement. They showed Charlotte bragging about having access to my identity for years. And the worst part? They showed Charlotte talking about me, not as a sister, as an enemy. In one message, she wrote, "Rachel thinks she's so perfect. She deserves to lose everything." In another, she wrote, "She's always been Mom's backup plan. I'm the one Mom really needs." And in another, she said something that made my hands go numb when Agent Morrison read it aloud during a call. "If she goes down, good. She's been choking the life out of me since we were kids." I almost laughed when I heard that. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. I had spent my entire life being invisible. I had been the one ignored, dismissed, expected to take care of myself. Charlotte had been protected like she was fragile, and yet, in her mind, my existence was oppression. My stability was an insult. My quiet independence was something she needed to punish. The preliminary hearing was scheduled about a month later. I wasn't required to attend, but I went anyway. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to see the moment when Charlotte couldn't twist the story anymore. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic music, no movie lighting, just beige walls, wooden benches, and the heavy feeling of people waiting for the truth. I sat on one side of the aisle with my attorney. Across from me sat Mark, in a suit that looked borrowed, hands folded, expression controlled. His eyes swept the room like he was assessing it for weaknesses. When he saw me, his gaze lingered, and for a moment, I felt that old nausea, the memory of David, the man who once looked at me like I was his entire world. I had loved him, I had trusted him, and he had stolen from me without hesitation. Now he was sitting 10 feet away, facing federal charges, and he looked at me like I was just another obstacle. Charlotte sat beside him. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were the same, sharp, watchful, hungry. And behind her sat my mother. My mother looked pale, tense, hands clasped tightly in her lap like she was praying. For Charlotte. Not for me. Not for the daughter who had almost been sent to prison for crimes she didn't commit. I watched my mother's profile and felt something hollow inside me. I didn't hate her in that moment. I simply saw her. I saw the woman who had spent 30 years pouring her guilt into one child and her neglect into the other. The hearing began. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with calm efficiency. Wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, conspiracy, numbers, dates, transactions. Then came the part that broke the illusion completely. The prosecutor presented the recovered messages. The judge listened in silence as the words were read aloud. Charlotte's words. Her hatred. Her bragging. Her plans. Her laughter. And then the prosecutor presented my evidence. The box. The letters. The stolen documents. The timeline I had built. The forensic analysis confirming the signatures were forged. The IP addresses tracing back to locations where Charlotte and Mark had lived. It was devastating. Not emotionally, though, it was that too, but structurally. The case against them wasn't built on suspicion. It was built on facts stacked so neatly they could crush a person. Charlotte's lawyer tried to interrupt, tried to argue coercion, tried to suggest she had been manipulated by Mark. Mark's lawyer fired back, claiming Charlotte had recruited him, that she had access to my identity long before he entered the picture. The judge didn't seem impressed by either attempt, because the truth was obvious. They had both participated. They had both benefited. They had both lied. And then something happened that I will never forget. The judge looked at Charlotte. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice firm, "you attempted to frame your sister for these crimes. That constitutes obstruction." My mother made a sound small, broken, like air leaving a balloon. I turned my head slightly and saw her face. She was staring at Charlotte, eyes wide, as if she had been waiting for someone in authority to say it out loud before she could believe it. Then the judge summarized the scope again. How many victims? How much money? How long it had been going on? And how my identity had been used like a shield. My mother's body swayed. For a second, I thought she would stand up, but instead, she collapsed. She fainted right there on the bench. My father caught her before she hit the floor. People rushed to help. Someone called for water. The courtroom paused, and I sat perfectly still. I didn't jump up. I didn't rush to her side. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. A strange, clean clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something painful and final. My mother wasn't fainting because she felt sorry for me. She was fainting because the fantasy she had built around Charlotte had finally shattered. And fantasies are powerful drugs. When they break, the body reacts like it's dying. After the hearing, Agent Morrison called me. "You've been officially cleared," she said. "Your victim status is now formally recognized in the record." I closed my eyes. For months, I had been holding my breath legally, professionally, emotionally. And now, finally, I could inhale. But even then, the story wasn't over. Because the legal consequences were only one part. The real consequences, the ones that would haunt me, were family-shaped. A few days after the hearing, my mother called. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then she called again, and again. On the fourth call, I answered. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "Rachel," she whispered, like saying my name hurt her mouth. "Please." I didn't know it was this bad. I almost said something cruel. I almost told her she knew enough. She knew Charlotte took my documents. She knew Charlotte lied for years. She knew I was always the one who had to be strong. But instead, I said something quieter. "You didn't want to know," I said. Silence, then a sob. And I hung up, because I wasn't ready to comfort the woman who had watched my sister tighten a noose around my life and called it love. The sentencing was still ahead. Charlotte and Mark were still waiting for the numbers that would define their next decade. But the real turning point had already happened. They had lost control of the narrative. They had lost the ability to twist me into the villain. And for the first time in my life, the entire world could see what I had always known in my bones. Charlotte didn't just take my heir as a joke. She tried to take my future as a plan, and she almost succeeded. By the time the sentencing date was set, I thought the worst of it was behind me. I had been cleared. My name was officially removed from the investigation. My attorney had called it a miracle, but I didn't feel like a miracle had happened. I felt like I had survived a fire that never should have started. My company reinstated me, quietly at first, like they were afraid to draw attention to the fact that they had been wrong. My director apologized in person. He didn't say much, just that he was sorry and that he should have trusted me. I nodded and accepted it because what else was I supposed to do? I needed my job back. I needed stability. I needed something in my life that still felt normal. On my first morning back, Linda was waiting at my desk with a small plant wrapped in brown paper and tied with a ribbon. "Told you," she said with a smile. Most honest person in the building. I smiled back, but it felt strange, like my face didn't remember how. That evening, my credit monitoring service sent another alert. This time it wasn't a new inquiry. It was a correction. My credit score, damaged for years by accounts I never opened, was finally being repaired. One by one, fraudulent accounts were removed. Collections were deleted. The invisible damage Charlotte had done in the dark was being undone in the light. I should have celebrated. But I didn't, because I wasn't waiting for my credit score to heal. I was waiting for the final consequences. And I was waiting for something else too, something I didn't want to admit I still wanted. An apology. Not from Charlotte, from my mother. But my mother still wasn't speaking to me. Not really. She had called a few times after the hearing, crying, whispering, saying she didn't know it was this bad. But she never said the words that mattered. She never said, "I'm sorry for choosing her over you." And I knew why. Because if she said it, she would have to face the fact that she had done it for 30 years. The sentencing hearing was only weeks away when the letter arrived. It was handwritten. The return address was the federal detention center where Charlotte was being held. I recognized her handwriting immediately. My stomach tightened the moment I saw it. My fingers hovered over the envelope like it might bite me. Part of me wanted to tear it up without reading. Part of me wanted to burn it. But another part of me, the part that still carried childhood hope, like an old bruise, needed to know what she had to say. I opened it. The words were messy, rushed, as if she had written them in a panic. "Rachel, I need to see you one more time. There's something I have to tell you. Something about Mom, about why I became this way. You deserve to know the whole truth, even if you hate me after. Especially if you hate me after. Please, just once." I read it 3 times. Then I set it down and stared at the wall. For 2 days, I didn't respond. I carried the letter around in my bag like a weight. I took it out at lunch and reread it. I folded it back up. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't, because the letter did something Charlotte had always been good at. It pressed on the part of me that still wanted answers. So I requested a visitation appointment. The detention facility was exactly what you imagine. Cold, gray, designed to strip away comfort. The walls were bare, the lights were harsh, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion. I sat in the visitation room for 20 minutes waiting, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept telling myself I could leave. I could stand up and walk out. I didn't owe her anything. But I stayed. When they finally brought Charlotte in, I barely recognized her. She looked smaller. Not physically fragile, but diminished. Like the confidence she wore like armor had been scraped off. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was pale. Her eyes looked tired in a way I had never seen before. She sat across from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I didn't think you'd come," she said finally, voice hoarse. "I almost didn't," I replied. She nodded, hands twisting together nervously. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I've never told anyone, not even Mark." I felt my stomach tighten at his name. Charlotte took a shaky breath. "When I was 7, she said, I woke up in the middle of the night. I heard Mom crying in the kitchen." Her voice cracked. "She was on the phone. I think it was Grandma, and she was saying terrible things. She said she couldn't do it anymore. She said 2 kids was too much." Charlotte swallowed hard, eyes filling with tears. "She said she had already signed papers." I stared at her. "What papers?" I asked, though my chest already felt tight, like I knew. Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. She was going to give me away. The words landed in the room like something heavy breaking. "She was going to let strangers take me," Charlotte continued. "She said you were easier because you were older. You didn't need as much. But me, I was too much." Tears streamed down her face now. "I heard every word," she said. "I was 7 years old, and I heard my mother say she was going to throw me away like I was nothing." I sat very still, and suddenly a memory flashed through my mind, my mother years ago. Face white, stopping herself mid-sentence. "You don't understand what Now I understood." Charlotte wiped her face roughly. "She changed her mind," she said. "Obviously, I'm still here, but I never forgot it. I spent my whole life waiting for her to change it back." Her eyes locked onto mine. "Every time she bought me something," Charlotte whispered. "Every time she defended me. Every time she chose me over you. I thought she was making up for almost giving me away. And I was terrified that if I ever stopped being her favorite, if I ever stopped being special, she would finally do it." My throat tightened, not from anger, from something else, a kind of awful understanding. Charlotte leaned forward, voice shaking. "So I made sure I was always the one she needed most," she said. "I made sure you were always the one she could ignore, because if she ever had to choose between us, I needed her to choose me. Every time." I stared at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my sister as just cruel. I saw her as damaged. I saw a terrified 7-year-old girl who had built her entire identity around survival. And for one brief moment, I felt something close to pity. I exhaled slowly. "You were a child," I said quietly. "What you heard was traumatic. I understand that." Charlotte's face lifted slightly, hope flickering, but I didn't let her cling to it. "You're not a child anymore," I continued. "You've been an adult for over a decade, and you chose to steal my identity. You chose to frame me for federal crimes. You chose to let me lose my job, my reputation, and maybe my freedom, just to save yourself." Charlotte's hope collapsed. Her mouth trembled. "And Rachel," I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sterile room. "I hope you find peace someday," I said. "I genuinely do. I hope you get help. But I can't give you forgiveness." Tears spilled down Charlotte's cheeks. "Please," she whispered. I shook my head. "Goodbye, Charlotte." And I walked out. The air outside the facility felt different. Colder, cleaner, like the world had space in it again. 2 weeks later, the sentencing hearing arrived. The judge read the charges with the same calm voice he might use to read grocery items. But the words carried weight. Charlotte received 4 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and restitution. Mark received 9 years and a much larger restitution order. When the numbers were spoken, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release, like something that had been tightening around my life for years had finally loosened. A few days after sentencing, my mother called. Her voice was small. "Rachel," she said, "can we meet? Just you and me. I need to explain." I agreed, but only on my terms. A coffee shop, public, neutral, no emotional traps. When she arrived, she looked like she had aged 10 years. Her hands shook around her cup. "Charlotte told me what she said to you," my mother whispered, "about what she heard when she was 7. I nodded. My mother swallowed hard. "It's true," she said. 30 years ago, we almost gave her up. Your father lost his job. We were behind on rent. We couldn't feed 2 children. I called an adoption agency. I signed preliminary paperwork." She took a ragged breath. "And then the night before the home visit, I went to check on her. She was awake, looking at me with those big eyes, and I couldn't do it. I tore up the papers." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I never spoke of it again," she whispered. "But I spent 30 years trying to make up for something I almost did." She looked at me with desperate eyes. "And in doing that," she said, "I abandoned you." I stared at her for a long moment. "Yes," I said quietly, "you did." She flinched like I had slapped her. Then I asked the question I needed answered. "When Charlotte took my documents 6 years ago," I said, "you saw her." My mother's face crumpled. "I remembered that night," she whispered. "I told myself, just this once. Just let it go. I'll deal with it later." "There was no later," I said. She cried silently, and for a moment, I watched her with a strange emptiness, not hatred, not forgiveness, just reality. I leaned forward. "I don't forgive you," I said. "I may never forgive you, but I'm not cutting you out completely." My mother looked up, shocked. "If you want to be part of my life," I continued, "it will be different. We start from zero, no more lies, no more choosing Charlotte over me. And you get therapy. You deal with what you've been carrying." My mother nodded frantically. "You'd give me that chance?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I'm giving myself that chance," I said. "I'm the one who decides how much of you I allow in my life." When I walked out of that coffee shop, the air felt lighter. Not because my family was healed, it wasn't, but because for the first time, I wasn't carrying their choices like they were mine. A year later, I sat in a new corner office. On my desk were 2 photographs, an old family portrait placed face down, and a new photo of me with Linda and coworkers at my promotion dinner. Smiling like I meant it, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother asking if she and Dad could visit next weekend. I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back, "Okay." But just coffee, my place, my terms, because that was the final lesson this story taught me. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't revenge. It's boundaries. It's choosing air. It's refusing to let anyone, family included, tighten anything around your throat ever again. What happened to me wasn't just a crime. It was something far more painful because it came from the people who were supposed to protect me. My sister didn't only steal my identity. She tried to steal my voice, my career, and even my future. And my mother's silence didn't just enable it. It almost destroyed me. But if this story teaches anything, it's this. The most dangerous people aren't always strangers. Sometimes they sit at your family table, smiling, while tightening the pressure around your life, little by little, until one day you can't breathe. Rachel's story is not about revenge through violence. It's about revenge through truth, through evidence, through boundaries, through finally choosing yourself after years of being trained to sacrifice your peace for family. And if you've ever felt invisible, used, or blamed for someone else's choices, I want you to know you're not alone. You deserve safety. You deserve respect. And you have every right to protect yourself, no matter who tries to guilt you into staying quiet. Thank you for listening to Hanjiwe Yagi. If this story moved you, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters here, and we read every single one.